Can you tell me your name?
Tina Barrett.
Okay, and what do you do here in Cincinnati?
I'm an attorney.
All right, and for people who aren't familiar with the Katelyn Markham case, can you give us a little bit of insight about it?
Well, Katelyn Markham was a young lady who living in Fairfield, and she went missing. I live in Fairfield, as does most of my family, and I learned about Katelyn the same way most people learned about Katelyn, and that's we saw a flyer. My daughter brought home a flyer of a missing girl, and I'll never forget that. My daughter's the same age as Katelyn. There's just a few months difference in their ages. And I identified very strongly with that because my daughter was standing there holding a picture of a young girl that could have been her, and she was missing. And at that time we were told that she was just gone. Nobody knew where she was or how she left. There was no signs of any kind of foul play. She had just vanished off of the face of the earth.
I see.
And so we all started looking for her. We literally all started looking for her. And not just in organized searches, but just all the time. Everybody was looking in their backyard and over the hill and under the barn and everywhere you went. You know, if you saw a pile of something, you wanted to stop and look at it. Make sure that's not Katelyn, or make sure that's not something that'll take us to Katelyn. I mean, how does a young girl, a young adult girl with her own car, with her own keys, how does she just disappear? But that's what happened to Katelyn. She just disappeared.
What type of community is Fairfield? Is something like this kind of commonplace for there?
I would say it's no more commonplace than it would be anywhere else, so no. Other people have disappeared from Fairfield, the same that they have disappeared from everywhere else. But over time, you know, people come and go, and maybe they forget. But this was not a usual sort of disappearance. This was not a girl that was out at a party and got out of the car, you know, on the way home. This was not a girl who left a bar angry. This was not a girl who met somebody new and went home with them or was hanging out with them. This is just a girl who went to work and came home and went to bed, and the next day she was gone. And I think that's unusual anywhere. And in Fairfield, it certainly was unusual, and it hit home close to home because I have a daughter that age who went to work and came home and went to bed that night, and thank God she was there in the morning.
As a mother, you're able to look at this case in certain ways, but as an attorney, as you started to think about the crime scene and the details of the disappearance during those first few days, did any red flags go off?
Well, I'm not so sure I looked at this as an attorney. I think I looked at this as a mother from the very beginning. And everything about the story that we were told made no sense. She's too big to disappear. You know, I can lose my keys, but they're small and they'll slip down behind things. She's a full-size girl. There's no way she just disappeared. And it just didn't make sense. And so I looked at it as a mother. I guess I can't divorce myself from the idea that I am an attorney and I have some analytical skills, some interviewing skills, some reasoning skills, and so I brought those to bear as I listened. I really wanted to believe that she was okay. I really wanted to believe that no one close to her even knew about what happened to her. It's really almost easier to think that there's a boogeyman out there and that every so often he's going to get somebody than to think that, you know, people we trust, people we spend our time with, people that we plan on spending our lives with or do spend our lives with could let us down in any way. And it just seemed like the story was hokey. And by the hokey story, I mean the story that her fiancé was telling. And I'm not the only one who felt that way. There was just this huge sort of outcry. There was a missing page, we call it the missing page, that Katelyn's family and friends set up pretty much immediately to get the word out that she was missing. And there were people who were commenting on there about how they felt about the story that they were hearing and the facts and how they weren't all sort of meshing together. And that was disturbing to a lot of people. You know, a lot of people were still trying to maintain hope and think positively and try to stay together and not turn on each other. And so those comments were hurtful to a lot of people. And I remember saying, just do this somewhere else. If you want to talk about it, fine, talk about it. Do it somewhere else. And nobody would. And so finally I set up a separate page. And I called it Katelyn Markham's Disappearance, Considering Everything. And it was a place where people could sort of get that out of their system. But, you know, family and friends who didn't want to think that there had been anything nefarious going on didn't have to see it. And that's how the Considering Everything page got started, and I was the admin.
So regarding John Carter, he immediately becomes a person of interest because he is the boyfriend or fiance.
Right.
Regarding those first stories that he starts telling, from the 911 call to other things, what type of things troubled you about his story?
Everything troubled me about his story. The 911 call is when I just lost all faith in him at that point. The 911 call, when that was made public, it was pretty clear that that was not a call for help. That was exactly what he said it was. He was reporting her missing. It just didn't make sense. Everything that he said, the strange little details that he would bring up, he made a point to talk about leaving her apartment with a big old bag of papers that night because she wanted him to burn them. Now that just sounds like a really bad writing in a really bad movie, but that's what he said. And that is made doubly weird by the fact that that night there was a torrential rainstorm. And I do mean torrential. It woke me up, and nothing wakes me up. There was some kind of a stands at a concert in Indiana that was blown over that night. People died. It was torrential. And he made a point of saying the last time that he saw her, she asked him to take a big old bag of papers to burn for her. And then she disappeared. And so he's either the unluckiest guy on the face of the earth to have just been asked to do the strangest thing I've ever heard of, in the worst conditions that I've ever heard of. The night before his fiancée just vanishes from the face of the earth, or the story is contrived. And I'm more inclined to believe that he's just not telling the whole story. That's just how I see it.
Were there any other details in his interviews, the media interviews, or any other things that he told investigators that tipped you off and thought that maybe he wasn't being forthcoming?
Well, his demeanor, just the things that he would focus on, the little details that he would focus on. He described her as the love of his life. And when he talked about her last words to him in texting, he would say, blah, blah, blah. Sort of, yada, yada, yada kind of things. But then he would be very specific about things like carrying the bag of papers out to burn and getting a picture from her. I remember the last words my father said to me, and he didn't go missing. I think that if he had really felt like she was missing, gone, oh my, what's happening, I need help, it seems more human nature that he would have focused on what did she say to me? Was there anything she said to me to suggest that there might have been someone there with her? He blah, 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 past what she said. So that was troublesome. Just his demeanor, just the things that he would laugh about. He at one point he said, I just want her here so that we can go to Red Lobster. That's all I want. And I believed that. I believed that he really did want her to come back. But I also believed that he knew she wasn't. More so than anybody, more so than he was letting on that he knew. But, you know, we have dissected John Carter's story many times because that's the story we have. He is the last person to have seen her. And so we focused on it. And as we focused more and more on the story, you're really left with a sense of disbelief that anybody could believe him. I don't know anybody that believes him. I mean, his family says that they believe him. Okay. But I don't really know anybody else that believes him. Now, that doesn't mean that he killed her. But I do believe he knows what happened to her. And I believe he knew she wasn't coming back when he reported her missing. You know, how he describes coming to realize that she was gone. He goes from being totally disinterested in the fact that he hasn't spoken to her in maybe 18 hours to being so panicked at work after he got to work when there are witnesses there who could witness him becoming concerned about his girlfriend, that he has to leave work and go check on her because she'll be getting home from work soon. And then when he comes to her house and sees her car, he reports that that made him panic. Now he really knew something was wrong because her car shouldn't be there. Well, why not? He said he was going there because he expected her to get home. So why would the presence of her car panic him? If when we've lost something and we're looking for it, no matter how irrational the idea is, if we get some hope that the thing or the person is there, it makes us feel relief, not dread. He had dread when he saw her car. I believe he had dread when he saw her car because he knew she wasn't with her car. He knew she couldn't be with her car. He knew all of those things. He reported her missing. That he did. He did not call for help in looking for his missing fiancée. And you know, that just really cuts through you when you're out looking for her.
In those initial searches, you were able to meet Katelyn's father, Dave Markham. Before we talk about David, did you get a chance to have any interactions with John Carter at the searches or any other time?
I did not. I didn't seek him out. And he sort of, you know, people turned a discerning eye towards John Carter pretty quickly. And he's not a dummy, and he would be present, but he would be sort of off to the sides a little bit. So, no, I didn't concern myself with John Carter. I concerned myself, you know, when I went to the searches for looking for Katelyn or any trace of Katelyn. I saw Dave Markham the same way that everyone else did. I didn't seek him out to talk to him personally. I went with my family to search for Katelyn.
And then as you got to know Dave, as a parent, what type of feelings were you having for him?
Well, I identified very strongly with Dave because, as I said, I've got a daughter who was Katelyn's age and really had kind of the same life going on. And I could imagine myself in his position, and I could not imagine myself being as calm and patient and strong about it. I couldn't imagine that. So my hat's off to Dave, but I certainly did understand how he felt. Katelyn became everyone's daughter. She was not just Dave Markham's daughter who was missing, but she was a daughter, and we all needed to find her. And so it was very emotional for me. And then when I was on the searches, I tried not to think about the story because it would make me angry. But then when I would go back to and manage the site, and it took a lot of managing because there was a lot of emotion there, I would find myself getting angry again. And I can see how someone might try to take law into their own hands or something if they were faced with such a loss and then such a crappy story. But he held it together. He had faith. It's my understanding he has a profound faith in God. He had a faith in his family and his friends and in the Fairfield Police Department. He put his faith in others and just held it together.
The Fairfield Police Department is somewhat under fire during the investigation for not making any arrests or basically having problems with the case. What's your impressions of the job that they've done in law enforcement in general with this case?
Well, for that I have to put on my attorney hat because I do represent Dave Markham. I am his counsel at this point. And he's been dissatisfied with the Fairfield Police Department of late, not because they haven't made an arrest or because they haven't solved Katelyn's murder, because, they're people, and sometimes you can't do what needs to be done. What he's upset about is that he believes that they've mismanaged things. A private investigator was hired who started digging into things, and it came to light that there were things that weren't chased down. And when I say Dave Markham had faith in the police department, he had faith that they were doing what they needed to do and that they were taking her disappearance very, very seriously and doing everything they could. And some of the evidence that was discovered it doesn't suggest. They made a conscious effort not to look in one direction. And based upon information that they had at the time. And that was troubling to Dave because they said they had no information. They said at the time they opted not to pursue this evidence. They had no suspects. They had no evidence. They didn't know she had been murdered. She was still missing. And they didn't know when she went missing. But they made a conscious effort not to pursue evidence that was closely associated with someone who had been one of the last people to see her. And so that was troubling. And there were other things. The private investigator did an interview with someone and had someone submit to a polygraph, and the person failed the polygraph. And the private investigator had contacted the detective in charge ahead of time, letting her know that, this is about to happen, and then let her know after the fact what had happened, and suggesting that the iron is hot. Now's the time to strike. And I believe it took weeks, not days, not minutes, not hours, not days, but weeks before that person was sought by the detective. So one of two things is going on. Either they know way more than they've said, and they're hot on the heels of what really happened here, and all of this other stuff is side, not interested. We don't need to spend our time on that. Or they just didn't pursue a potential lead, and they tell us they have no evidence. So the inference is then they just didn't pursue this lead as zealously as Dave would have wanted them to. I believe they want to solve the case. As a human being, I am sure every single person at the Fairfield Police Department wants to solve this case, and this is not a reflection on the police department as a whole, because those people were out looking for Katelyn too. There were off-duty police officers who were spending their time, looking for Katelyn, and these are people who continue to want to find Katelyn. The focus is on this particular investigation, which includes a limited number of people, and just the handling of the case since that time.
After several months, unfortunately, Katelyn is then found in Indiana. Can you recall that particular day, where you were and what you were doing when you received that news?
Well, we were hanging on every little bit of information, even at that point. And anytime there were remains found, people would speculate as to whether or not it could be Katelyn. And I remember just knowing that it was her. I just knew that it was her, based upon where they said they had found it. And I think we just all knew that it was her. And what I was doing was managing the Considering Everything page, because people were just really excited, happy that they had most likely found Katelyn, and really concerned about what it meant that she was in another state. As it turned out, Indiana State Police have been very helpful. So, as it turns out, I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing, that she was in another state.
Then, after that, speculation continues to swirl around John Carter, as it did earlier. As everything was unfolding, did your opinions about him change, or were you still pretty sure you felt that he had some involvement with her situation?
My opinion of John Carter has never changed. I think John Carter is not telling the truth. I don't know what that means. I really don't. I don't want to think that he harmed her in any way. She loved him. She was going to spend her life with him. And the idea that someone that she cared that much about would be a party to harm coming to her is not something that I want to think about. But I do believe that he knew she was dead. I know she's dead now. That doesn't mean that I had a part in it, but I know. He just knew way before everybody else did. That's what I think. And he was the last person to see her alive. So much effort goes into his story and his account of that night, for the fact that she was A-okay at midnight. I believe probably something happened before that. His story seems contrived. There are huge holes in the story, things that absolutely don't make sense, and he can't seem to fix it, or doesn't seem to want to. And so until his story makes sense, and I don't mean it has to fit together perfectly, life doesn't work that way. Life is messy. But there is an order to things, and there is no proper order to his story. And the life he describes that he had with her, and the fact that she ended up dead. It doesn't all fit together. His story sounds like a story made up after the fact for some reason to take him out of the knowledge that she had died. I don't know what happened. Maybe there was an accident and there was some panic and people covered things up. I don't know. But I believe he knows. And it's the not knowing that is so hard for us all, but mostly for the Markham family. To not know. To not know. And there are people who are, for their own reasons and not for Katelyn, seemingly concealing that knowledge. And and there are others of us who just are never going to let it go until we understand what happened. And I feel sorry for John Carter. I can't imagine that this is a great thing to have to happen in your life. But if he would just tell us what he knows, just tell us what you know. Tell us why your story doesn't make sense. Maybe it has nothing to do with Katelyn. I don't know. But I don't think he's telling the truth.
Do you think the case will ever be solved?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. Because there are a lot of moving parts here, I think that time loosens people's tongues and their resolve. It's been over 4 years, but in the great scheme of things, that's just a blink of an eye. The people who were in Katelyn's life, we're talking about very young adults. And, time has a way of changing people's perspective. Somewhere along the lines, someone is going to need to have a get-out-jail-free card, or somebody's going to want revenge, or somebody's going to want absolution, or somebody's going to want to have peace, and then they're going to tell. And that first person gets to set the story. And so hopefully they'll have good intentions. And then the rest will fall. And we'll probably find out that it wasn't all that exciting of a story. But it'll come out in time. Just, like a blister. I mean, or a splinter, if you get a splinter under your skin, it can sit there for a long time and hurt a little bit, and you might even learn to work around it. But in time, it'll push its way up to the front. It may take another injury, but it'll push its way up to the front, out. And I think that's what's going to happen with Katelyn's story. I think there are a lot of people who know a little bit. And somewhere along the lines, that little bit's going to come out, and then the dam is going to just burst open, and it's all going to be there. And we'll probably all be sitting here saying, why didn't they say that in the first place? And save a whole lot of sleepless nights for a dad and for a community. I mean, personally, I think that the story was such that if it had been told up front, it's likely people like me would have just said, oh, that's terrible. And never thought anything else of it, unfortunately. At least I hope. I hope there was nothing evil and nefarious. But the evil and nefarious part about it is just not telling. Dave Markham needs to know. Katelyn's family needs to know. Katelyn has a sister that needs to know. And if it was me, I would want to know. And so I I can't personally let this go until we know.
What's the current state of the case now? Recently, we've been told about a car that's being processed. Are you allowed to comment on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to comment on that. I know that there's a news report that said there was some evidence and it had to do with a car. I guess what I would say is that the private investigator came across some evidence that had never been processed. And the police department I did speak with someone about that evidence, and they said that that was not amiss, that they chose not to go down that avenue. And I can tell you that the evidence is now being processed. So, and you know, I don't know. It was a conscious decision, and that is the problem. Maybe this isn't evidence. Maybe there's nothing here. But maybe there is. And if there is, what does that mean? That means that it sat for 4 years. It wasn't processed for 4 years. There would be chain of custody issues. There would be issues of degradation of evidence. So if you're going to process it, it seems like closer to 4 years ago would have been better. But I guess better late than never. It is being processed. And that's all I really know. I do know that at the request of Dave Markham, the Butler County Sheriff has agreed to take a look at the case, work with Fairfield Police Department, and offer a fresh set of eyes to the case, which is all that Dave Markham has been wanting for some time, is a new, fresh set of eyes to look at the case. And so that's happening. So those are a couple of things that are going on. I would hope that something materializes with this evidence, but I don't know that it will. And I would hope that a fresh set of eyes looking at the case would open something new up, but I don't know that it will. But these are good things that are going on, and I know that it's giving Dave some hope, and hope is a double-edged sword, though. But I imagine after 4 years, he's learned that. Dave Markham has learned that. It could take, we could find out what happened in a matter of weeks. It could be, but it could be years. I suppose it could be decades. I can't imagine wanting to live with the knowledge that you know something, and because you didn't tell it, you could potentially have your life completely destroyed. And that's what some people are living with. I know they're living with it. I don't know how they're living with it. Maybe they're getting therapy, maybe they're using drugs, maybe they're just ignoring it. But that would be a terrible, terrible way to live. And I believe completely that there are people living that way. It would be scary to know that at any given time somebody could say something and your whole world could come crashing down. I don't feel sorry for them. I just wouldn't want to live that way.